Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for this very special webinar with Minister Martin Pakula. I'm Paul Guerra, Chief Executive of the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and together with our President, Karen Sobels, it's my great pleasure to welcome you today. In conjunction with Small Business Victoria, we have been running these webinars to help you all gain some wonderful insights, and today we get the privileged opportunity to hear from another key minister in the Andrews government. I might just add that the Minister has one of the best teams, and I do want to particularly acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of Simon Femister, David Latina, Barbara Cullen and their teams, and also the key ministerial advisors in industry and tourism. When you think that the state has come right out of responding to bushfires and then into COVID, the responsiveness from the state has been brilliant and in a large part led behind the scenes by the people I've just mentioned. Don't forget, you can go to www.business.vic.gov.au to access business advice, as well as the grants that are available from the state government. And I must make mention of the small business grant, which closes on June 1st. So please hurry up and apply. And of course, for access to the Victorian Chamber's business advice and assistance, go to www.victorianchamber.com.au. Also, don't forget you can help us all get back to business sooner by downloading the COVID Safe app. So please, if you haven't already done so, now might be a good time to do it. With that, let's introduce our guest today, Minister Martin Pakula, whose portfolios include racing, jobs, innovation and trade, tourism, sport and major events, and a senior coordination role in the Andrews government's COVID-19 response. With further signposting for easing restrictions around on the weekend, it is great timing to have Minister Pakula with us today. You can safely say the Minister's decisions affect every business operating in Victoria, indeed every Victorian living in our great state. But having known Minister Pakula for many years now, I can assure you we are in very good hands, given the experience and capability the Minister brings. Welcome, Minister. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Paul, and I hope you can hear me. It's wonderful to be joining you all. I want to start by thanking the Victorian Chamber for all of the work that you've done over the last few months, going really right back to bushfires. When we came up with the idea for business and sport for recovery, it's probably not well known, but the first call I made was, in fact, to Paul and to ascertain whether the VCCI and its members would be keen to participate in that idea about getting businesses, board meetings and conferences and training seminars out to regional Victoria. You were enthusiastic supporters of that idea, and I was very grateful for that. I think it is important to acknowledge that we're in a new phase now as economic activity starts to resume more quickly from the 1st of June. Of course, for a number of year levels, school went back yesterday, and for the rest of the year levels, they will go back on the 9th of June. There is a range of other easing that will occur from June 1, including the ability for restaurants to take seated patrons, some of the changes in regards to community sport, the use of community facilities, and an increased number of visitors in people's homes. So we will see activity start to recommence. It is important, though, to note that the Premier has reiterated again this morning that for the month of June at least, it is still the government's strong view that if people have been working from home, they should continue to do so. We recognise that means that economic activity, particularly in the CBD, does not fire up again as quickly as it otherwise might. If you think about the thousands of transmissions that have occurred in places like the USA and Europe, they started with one. And so the Chief Health Officer still has a very strong view about thousands of people commuting into the city at once, sharing buildings, sharing lifts, sharing lunchrooms. And so for the time being, it remains the strong view that people who can work from home should do so. I want to just talk briefly about some of the support we've provided, and then, but I don't want to talk too long, Paul, because I want to leave as much time as possible for questions.
Brilliant.
But we have as many of your members would know, I'm sure, produced an economic survival package that we produced in consultation with the Chamber and other employer groups. The $500 million Business Support Fund, which has one-off grants of $10,000 for small businesses most heavily affected by coronavirus. And there have been tens of thousands of businesses that have already applied for that. Over $500 million in payroll tax refunds for small and medium-sized businesses with payroll under $3 million. We've also, of course, announced the Working for Victoria program, which has employed now thousands and thousands of people in important work, whether it's in community cleaning, in the quarantine program, in call centres dealing with contact tracing, in food delivery and things of that nature. We've also supported the Commercial Tenancy Relief Scheme with a 6-month rent freeze and access to land tax relief for landlords and a temporary ban on evictions. We've got the Small Business Commissioner assisting with mediations where it's been difficult for commercial tenants and their landlords to reach agreement, and that mediation service has been working very successfully so far. We also announced last week a $2.7 billion building works package aimed at getting people back to work through shovel-ready projects. We think that'll create somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 jobs in reasonably short order. Right. We have been working very closely with industry on that. It's going to be particularly focused on education, on tourism, on some of those projects in the hospitality sector and in regional Victoria. And we've got a number of projects which have been announced, which we think can start this year and can get a number of tradespeople, painters, plasterers, gardeners, engineers and the like back to work. I should make a couple of additional comments about what will happen on June 1st. So as I'm sure people have now seen, that in terms of restaurants, cafes and other hospitality businesses, there'll be an ability to seat 20 patrons per single undivided space from the 1st of June. That is planned to increase to 50 from the 22nd of June, subject to ongoing low numbers of transmission. So we need to continue to see those numbers that are low. And I should make the point, Paul, that we are by far the highest rate of per capita testing in the country. And in fact, we are now the highest raw numbers of testing in the country. In fact, if Victoria was a nation state, we would have the 6th highest per capita testing rate on the planet. So we are seeing some higher numbers in terms of positives than are being seen in other parts of the country, but we are testing way more. So to draw some comparisons with, say, Western Australia, for example, we have about 2.5 times the population, but we've done about 6 times the number of tests. And even a state which believed it to be almost COVID-free, if you see what happened in the announcement in Queensland from today, and I know that Queensland believe themselves to be very close to having low levels of almost no community transmission. A man died in a part of Queensland where they had absolutely no sense that there was any coronavirus at all, and he's been tragically found dead this morning, tested positive for coronavirus, as does his partner. So this is a person that hadn't left that town for at least the last 3 months. So it's clearly circulating in ways that are undetected in parts of the country. And we think our approach of very high levels of testing, very high levels of contact tracing, even though it may provide us with some unwanted headlines, is absolutely the best way to knock the disease out. So that's what we will continue to do. Very pleasingly, the Chief Health Officer has decided that from 1 June, people can again travel to and stay in regional Victoria in hotels and motels, and even in caravan parks and camping grounds where there are not shared facilities. So I think that's a hugely welcomed announcement. And I know from talking to Felicia Mariani from VTIC, there is an enormous level of excitement about the ability to once again stay in regional Victoria. A great opportunity for those businesses to earn some income, and an even better opportunity, I think, for Victorians who've been doing the right thing by staying at home to get away and have a weekend away. So, look, there's a lot more I could talk about. We've made some decisions to assist international students. We're working very closely with the Commonwealth about trying to get some degree of international education back. We think our university precincts will be incredibly important in terms of recovery, that research work, the innovation work, and we don't need our university sector to be impoverished forever by this. So we need to get some degree of international students back, and we believe we can do that safely with appropriate quarantine arrangements. We are also working closely with the manufacturing sector in terms of supply chains. One of the things that coronavirus has made clear is some of the perils of relying exclusively on international supply chains. So we've been working closely with local manufacturers in terms of PPE. We've been working closely with a range of local manufacturers on the production of ventilators. And I think one of the things that will emerge from this, and it's clear in conversations with the Commonwealth that this is the case, that there will be some critical thinking about what is our essential national manufacturing capability and requirements, so that we are not unreliant, but less reliant on global supply chains in the future in some critical areas. And we think medical and equipment manufacturing is a part of that. And in terms of our work and our strengths as a state, we think we're very well placed to capitalise on that. So, I think what I'll do, Paul, is stop there so that we allow at least a quarter of an hour for questions, and I'll hand back to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Covered a lot in that part. And in fact, we might pick up the questions in and around the research sector, which is globally renowned and really critical to industry in Victoria. And you mentioned universities in your prelude there. How do you see universities and industry growing collaboration, and hopefully the outcome of that is increased commercialisation in the post-COVID environment?
Yeah, well, look, we're talking really consistently with the vice chancellors. You would have seen that the Treasurer and Minister for Higher Education announced a support package for the university sector just last week. One of the key parts of that support is support for projects which will actively increase that research and that collaboration and be better aligned with A, the needs of the state, but B, the needs of business. Now, some universities do that very well already. When you look at some of the work that Monash University is doing, for example, some of the work that Deakin does down at Geelong with advanced manufacturing. But we do want to see much more of the work of universities, and I don't say this pejoratively. These are conversations I've had with chancellors and vice chancellors. We want to see a lot of that research work move away from research for the purpose of simply producing erudite papers and grants, and much more into into research that will produce product, commercialise and create jobs, and I think that is a key objective of the Commonwealth as well. So it is an extremely important objective. So we are providing quite a deal of financial support to the university sector. We're working closely with all of the major universities in Victoria, but we're also working very closely with Minister Tehan and indeed with Minister Hunt, so that we can ensure that, for instance, that medical research is well supported here in Victoria. And there's some great examples with Johnson & Johnson, and as I say, if you look at some of the work down at Warren Ponds that's being done, some great collaboration between universities and advanced manufacturers.
Yeah, that's great. We're very excited about the potential that exists within that. We'll move to the other part of your portfolio now, which is, Victoria, Melbourne as a city destination. We've got so much to offer, and I'll talk about events shortly, but the bars and cafes and cultural experience are key to the global renown that Melbourne has.
Yeah.
As you know, we've been working closely with some of the most iconic venues, but what's your thoughts on how we can make sure we can retain the best draw cards during the crisis, so that when they're able to, they can come back?
Yeah, it's a really, it's a really complex question, Paul. And as you know, you and I have talked about this a number of times. When COVID-19 is receding, is over, there will be a global rush for much of the same product. So whether it's business events, major events, direct flights, international students. So we're going to need a very strong economic recovery package. We've already announced, as you know, a substantial economic survival package. So, for example, we've provided support for the Melbourne Convention Centre so that they can navigate their way through this period of time. We announced a $150 million package for our sporting and cultural institutions only a couple of weeks ago. So that'll support, that's supporting many of our, professional sporting codes, but it's also supporting our galleries, our arts institutions, and also ensuring that we've got continued support for our nighttime economy through the Business Support Fund. Yeah. We've had some real issues with some of those bars and pubs that you referred to in terms of some conflicts between them and their landlords, and we've provided significant support for them through that. We think in terms of, we are incredibly well placed, in terms of our major events calendar, our theatres, and we are ensuring that they all survive this period of time. But the real question is about how we reboot, particularly in an environment where there's still a lot less activity in the CBD than, we would see when people go back to work. So having some ability to seat patrons now will help a bit. I think coming out of this, we would want to see long-term investment in the Business Events Fund and ensure that it is able to absolutely compete, not just with Sydney, because it's always seen as being about Sydney. It's about Singapore, it's about Hong Kong, it's about Auckland, it's about all of those other parts of our region. We've got a really highly motivated team at Visit Victoria working on a range of major events that, we won't talk about for fear of providing a competitive advantage to our rivals. But I think, Brendan McClements and his team there are doing some extraordinary work on trying to attract some really great new events. And you might have seen some of that marketing material that went up last week about Melbourne in the last few days, which is really unlike anything we've seen before from Visit Victoria. In terms of the theatre district, we're working closely with Mariner and with some of those big producers to ensure that, the hiatus in Harry Potter doesn't remain permanent. We've still got Moulin Rouge planning to come out in 2021. So we think we've got some great stuff there, and we're working closely with the airport about what kinds of attractions we need to put in place, what kinds of incentives we need to put in place to ensure that we get not just the tourist flights, but a much better share of the business market. So there's a lot of work going on, but by necessity, now's not the time to roll it out because we're still in a phase of restrictions. But with the support and assistance of organisations like yours, we'll be ready to go and all of that stuff when the time is right.
No, that's good. There's a number of questions coming through around hospitality, which we'll pick up offline. But certainly the message we're getting from hospitality is the 4 square metre space and the move to increase numbers is going to be critical for that to occur. But we'll pick up that offline. You mentioned tourism there. It's no doubt been one of the hardest hit industries, and certainly the conversation around international people arriving back in Australia is still some way off. So is it possible for the industry to survive with domestic only tourism in the short to medium term?
Look, when you say for the industry to survive, I suppose it depends on what we mean, Paul. There are, I suspect, undoubtedly there'll be some operators who may not reopen. I don't think I'm not bold enough to say that every single operator in the sector will reopen. We have provided critical support to some of those parts of the tourism sector that we think are absolutely crucial. They're anchor parts of the industry. So if you think about Sovereign Hill, Puffing Billy, Penguin Parade, the Great Ocean Road, and crucially the Convention Centre, that they've been recipients of government support. As you know, we've provided some support to VTIC to continue to support your members, and we've provided support to the regional tourism boards so that they can continue to support all of those parts of all of those operators within their region with some fee waivers and some other marketing. Visit Victoria's got some great marketing material rolled out, ready to go, but again, it's got to be done at the right time. And beyond that, we think that the return to operation of regional accommodation providers over the next few weeks will be a substantial fill-up. Interestingly, I think the fact that some borders are closed interstate is something that we really need to capitalise on.
Yep.
People will not be travelling to the Gold Coast anytime soon. They will not be travelling to Western Australia or indeed even to South Australia. So I think it's a great opportunity for our local industry to capitalise on that in an environment where people are desperate to get away. And so we'll be providing support to all of our regions, and Visit Vic have been working on really tailored regional support packages and regional marketing campaigns to ensure that all, whether it's Mildura, Dalesford, Macedon, the Great Ocean Road, that we've got the ability to market those separately. So look, I have no doubt that the vast bulk of the industry can survive with our support, and in an environment where people are desperate to get away and interstate borders are closed, I think we've got a great chance to do something wonderful for those operators over the next few months.
I concur with your comments around Visit Victoria, and I think Brenda's doing a wonderful job with the team out there. And I think the good part about hearing you talk then, most people would have been unaware how familiar you are with regional Victoria. So to reel through those regions gives people a really strong sense of the connection that you have with Victoria outside of metropolitan area. And I think now's a great time to go and see the great state. Go and see your favourite spot. Perfect opportunity while there's less people there. I do want to bring it back into almost CBD now. I know the conversations you and I have had around how do we get the CBD up and working. A large amount of that is how do you carry people through the peak, both to the office and then back home through that. So public transport becomes something that needs to be addressed. Obviously, if people are going to drive in, there's car parking and traffic on that. I know you've started working through what that plan looks like. Are you able to fill us in a bit more on that?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be, I think travelling to and from the city is going to be one of the key difficulties that we need to get our head around. And I say that because, not because the transport routes aren't there, but I suspect there will be, for a period of time, there will be a reluctance for a lot of people to want to travel on public transport. So that is something that Minister Allen is working really diligently on. I think part of the solution to that will be, and we're, as you know, we're talking to industry about things like staggered hours, staggered start times, so that there will be some behavioural change that has occurred as a consequence of COVID-19 that I suspect will become at least semi-permanent. So I think part of the solution will be about staggered hours. I think part of the solution might be about not people working full-time at home, but maybe a bit more work from home, whether it's a day a week or, there are things that we have always done face-to-face that I think people for the first time have realised can be done remotely. I think it would be deleterious to the future of the CBD if it became everybody all the time. And I don't think anybody is suggesting that, but I think there can be some demand management, worked out. I think there'll be no doubt some people looking at investing further in things like cycling routes into the city, because there are a whole cohort of people who live within a 10k radius of the CBD who've probably been getting fitter now and won't want to be stuck in cars and won't want to travel on the train, who will come to work in other ways. And then of course, in terms of the nighttime economy, when transport issues are not as severe, I think we will see a lot of people starting to head back in the evenings after June 1 to take up a table at their favourite restaurant. But as I've said to the Premier and others, these are not establishments that survive fundamentally on nighttime visitation alone. So the daytime stuff's really important. So as people start filtering back into the city, those problems will become less acute. But how we plan those transport routes, whether it's parking, whether it's slowly filtering people back onto public transport in ways that they're comfortable with, appropriately distanced, maybe looking at, standing versus sitting, maybe it's looking at, capacity limits on our trains. Those sorts of things will become clear in the next, couple of weeks.
Yeah, in an interesting way, suburbia will cope with this better because you'll be able to get around, and there's a few comments coming in around regional Victoria, and this is an opportunity, I think, for people to reconsider where they're living. We're now seeing technology augment reality, so it does open up regional Victoria for that opportunity.
Yeah. Paul, there's no doubt. I've we've heard a number of comments from people I know and from people I interact with who said that, look, for the first time, they now believe that moving to and living in regional Victoria is a valid option for them, because they now know that they might be able to work remotely, if not all the time, at least part of their week. So, moving an hour or two from Melbourne and only having to come into the city maybe a couple of times a week rather than every day, or perhaps not at all, is now much more viable as an option for people.
Yeah, I know we're coming to the end of time. Have you got a couple more minutes to spare, or are we?
Indeed.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk about, and we're talking to our members about letting our recovery to COVID define us rather than the virus itself. And I know that's a theme that's picked up inside of government. So just coming to that then, another key part of your portfolio is industry and jobs. You talked about PPE as being an opportunity. Where else do you see that playing out post-COVID?
Well, I think, I think, PPE is but one example. I think medical and pharmaceutical manufacture, vaccines, we've been talking to CSL in recent days. We think, some of the advanced research that's being done in that sector could readily move to commercialisation, the creation of industries and job creation with the right dedicated focus. And I see David Latina on the line. He and I have been working very diligently together on some of our thinking about how we might be able to, whether it's a centre of excellence or something of that nature, to really capitalise on some of our capacity in medical research. But I think, as we think about some of the new ways of thinking that are emerging as a consequence, whether it's about smart transport planning, whether it's about the creation of some of that roadside infrastructure that you would need to work more, to be more advanced in things like connected and automated vehicles. We've got companies in Victoria that are absolutely capable of doing that work. But really, you're limited only by your imagination. I mean, sports technology is a huge, we think it's a huge advantage for us. We've got great capacity with some of our sports tech companies to export to the world. We've got some, really great international investment occurring in cyber and tech. And it's why I go back to the point about our university sector being crucial. When you talk to companies, whether it's a company like Zendesk or, a company like Microsoft, and you say, well, what is it that helps to influence your decisions about where you put your international investment and create those jobs? It's access to graduates. It's access to skilled graduates. We also think we've got some really great advantages in defence. I mean, one of the things that comes up pretty regularly in some of the work that David Latina and I are doing is that, Commonwealth government makes decisions about, headline decisions about where defence work goes. Where most of the supply chain work still ends up? It still ends up in Victoria.
Yeah.
It ends up in Victoria because we've got the companies and we've got the graduates. So, whether they're announcing that they're building ships or tanks in South Australia or Queensland, huge swathes of that supply chain still come through Victoria, because you talk to these companies and say, well, look, we've been told we've got to go to Adelaide, but really components A through Z are all going to be manufactured here, and they might go over there for assembly. So we don't get too concerned about where the headline announcements are about things like that. We know we've got the supply chain. And, part of the challenge through this is to ensure that every part of that supply chain that we keep alive through this really, really challenging period of time. And look, there's way more than that. There's the whole event space. So there's Victoria, is doing, in the lead up to COVID-19, we were the fastest growing. Melbourne was the fastest growing city in the country by somewhat. We were really on a very quick course to overtake Sydney as the largest city in the nation. And a huge part of that has admittedly been construction and population growth, and there will be some challenges which are created by what we expect to be a reduction in population growth and a reduction in inbound immigration. But we're still seeing strength in the construction sector. The government plays a significant role in generating that, but there's also still a good deal of private sector strength in the construction industry as well.
There's a lot to like. As the Treasurer reminds me, we were the engine room of the economy coming into COVID. We want to be that coming out of COVID as well. And I know you've got a bunch of questions, perhaps just one for the Minister before we move to wrap it up. So Head of Media and Comms, Anne Wright.
Hi, I'll go with Alina Young, who asked, what role do you see innovation playing in recovery, not just for startups, but for established businesses?
Well, I think, and I think I've covered that a bit. Innovation is a big catch-all term, and it is easy to think about. It is easy to think about innovation only in the sense of the startup community, and we have had a range of unicorns which have been created here in Victoria, whether you're looking at Seek or Aconics or a number of companies that have gone from very small businesses to very large businesses over a reasonably short period of time. But as someone like Jefferson Harcourt would always remind me, innovation is not just about the startup community. It's about some of your really well-developed engineering capability, for instance, that exists. So if you have a look at the supply chain that we're putting together to build ventilators here in Victoria, that is a great innovation story. That's about people taking existing skill sets and converting them to something that they've never done before. If you look at the way that we quickly converted gin distilleries into the manufacture of hand sanitizer in the first few weeks, I think something like 75% of our state's hand sanitizer requirements over the last few months has become converted to locally manufactured hand sanitizer, because we had great innovation occurring, not just at places which already make products like that, so at places like Ego Pharmaceuticals, but at places that have never manufactured hand sanitizer before. We saw it already in the way that large parts of the automotive supply chain converted to being parts of the defence supply chain and are now working with us in the mining sector, or indeed trying to help us with health procurement. So innovation is going to be enormously important. And as we talk about the changing nature of work that I think is going to be expedited as a consequence of COVID-19. If you look at the way that these disruptive events change the world, I'll give you an example. I think David might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think before the SARS outbreak, Alibaba was a mum and pop sort of online retailer, and SARS turned it into a global behemoth. There's no doubt in my mind that there will be companies that will emerge out of COVID-19 as a consequence of the disruption that's occurred over the last few months. And so businesses seeing those opportunities and being able to innovate is going to be a great part of that, and we'll be assisting them in every way that we can, whether that's through financing, access to capital, or indeed government as a customer. We'll be looking to see which businesses that emerge from this we can turn into big employers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anne. I'm sure that's music to everybody's ears. I mean, LaunchVic has been going for a number of years now, so we're deep in the innovation space and have been for a state for a while. The overarching message is that I'm picking up for business is we're ready to go, and that's got to be good news for the government. You got businesses willing to work with you, but really wanting to push you now to to help us and help them get back into business quickly, which is good news for our economy.
Yeah, and Paul, if you any of those questions that we haven't got to, and I'm sure there's lots, just send them through, and we'll get something back to you that you can put up online.
Wonderful. With that, don't forget to head to the Becky website at www.victorianchamber.com.au for all your business advice. And of course, today's webinar will put the questions back through and answers back through that. And of course, www.business.vic.gov.au for access to all the state government support and grant applications that the Minister talked about previously. So thank you. That's all we have time for today. I hope you found it interesting. And I'd like to invite Becky's President, Karen Sobels, to formally close today's webinar.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you, Minister. I think you're quite right there. What we saw coming up on the panel, there were hundreds of questions. So the engagement has been amazing. So I'm sure we will get those questions to you and we will put them up on our website to make sure that we can get back to everybody. Firstly, this is a health crisis and we recognise it's a health crisis, but because of the good work that we've done in Australia, we're feeling a little bit comfortable, and we need to recognise, as your example of the Queensland death recently, we're not over it and we haven't conquered it. That said, we need to have a measured restart, but simultaneously we need to do it quickly enough so the maximum number of businesses can actually reopen. That will take innovation, it will take communication, and it will take collaboration. And the Chamber has been, and Paul and his office have been working very closely, I know, with your office and the department to make sure that we can be the voice of business back into the department. And I know that's been working very well, and there's been great two-way communication there. So thank you for that. We look forward to continuing to work with your office to get Victoria back in action. And a big part of that is you being here today to listen to and see those hundreds of questions of what our businesses in the state are asking. So thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciate your openness, and we welcome you back anytime.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Minister. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.